Oh, hey, I thought you were going to start without me. What if I told you there was one change about how shoppers make purchase decisions happening right now that's so disruptive that it can completely wipe out some of the world's biggest brands? That change is called absolute value, and this video is going to teach you exactly what it is and how you can benefit from it. If that sounds good to you, grab a coffee and let's get into it. I'm Jason Retailgeek Goldberg. I'm the Chief Commerce Strategy Officer at the Publicis Groupe. I get to work with many of the largest brands and retailers in the world. This is a 4-part series on the psychology of shopper marketing. In part 1, we talked about how important trust is to the commerce relationship. In part 2, we talked about earning that trust using a cognitive bias called social proof. Now, in part 3, we're going to look at a little known but powerful aspect of shopper marketing psychology called absolute value. So what is absolute value? Well, it's slightly difficult to explain, but it's easy to understand with an example. So let's start with that. How many of you have ever shopped for a super sexy product like a hard drive? It's actually very difficult because if I handed you a hard drive, you couldn't tell a good one from a bad one. And if you've ever stood in the aisle in a store or looked at a category page on a website, the picture on the box or the picture on that website for every product looks exactly the same. They all have exactly the same 3 selling bullets. And so how is it that we are able to pick a hard drive? Well, what we do is we go to a familiar brand. Perhaps you've used Toshiba hard drives in the past and had a great outcome. Perhaps your father always used Western Digital hard drives, or maybe the geek in your circle of friends suggested Seagate hard drives. But regardless of which hard drive you have an affinity for, since you couldn't judge quality yourself, you used a familiar brand as a shortcut for quality. And sure enough, that is one of the fundamental attributes of a brand. A marketing professor in the 1970s, David Aakar, came up with this model for defining the value of brands, the equity that brands have. And in the Aakar model, he suggested that there are 4 components to brand value. One component is called brand awareness. People can become familiar with a brand over time and then therefore give it a preference. Another attribute is perceived quality, that when it's hard to judge the quality of something, that people assume the brand they're familiar with is the higher quality one. That's what we're going to primarily be talking about today. The third element is brand association, that sometimes people like what using a brand says about them. A lot of luxury products heavily rely on this brand association, that carrying a Prada bag or driving a BMW says something to others about you based on your choice of brands. And then fourth, once consumers publicly declare their affinity for a brand, they have loyalty for that brand and they generally don't like to change. So that brand becomes more sticky for that consumer. So all 4 of those attributes can contribute to the overall value of a brand. And sure enough, this has been going on since the advent of national consumer brands. Back in the late 1700s, during the Industrial Revolution, there was a big change in how consumers got food. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, you almost certainly would have primarily bought and consumed food from producers that you knew personally. You knew the farmer that grew the wheat. You knew where that wheat was milled. You knew what the quality of that flour was. But during the Industrial Revolution, where we started producing these foods on a larger scale and distributing them wider, suddenly consumers had to trust this unfamiliar company that was providing them flour. And when that flour is sealed in a barrel, it can be hard to judge the quality. Is the flour going to be rancid when I open this barrel? Is it potentially going to make me sick? So some of the first consumer brands started putting their company brand on their product. In the case of flour, that word brand came literally from people taking a hot metal brand and burning it into the wooden barrel. And so King Arthur flour, for example, became famous for branding their barrels. And when a consumer saw that brand on the barrel at the store, they could trust that that was a high quality product. And if they had a good result with that product the last time they used King Arthur flour, then perhaps they should prefer to get King Arthur flour again. So that literally is how brand works, right? And so going back to the hard drive example, it's not surprising that we would all use a brand as a way to choose a hard drive when it was hard to judge the quality. And there's only one problem with this story. And you know what that is? This is no longer how consumers shop for hard drives. Do you know how a consumer shops for a hard drive today? They type into their phone, what's the best hard drive to buy? And Google sends them to the #1 result, which is a website from a company called Backblaze.com. Backblaze.com sells cloud storage over the internet. They're a great company. I highly recommend them. They buy tens of thousands of hard drives every year. And for over 10 years, they've been keeping track of how well all the hard drives they buy perform. And they publish an annual report saying exactly how well all the hard drives they bought performed. So when you ask Google what the best hard drive is, Google sends you to this Backblaze page, and this Backblaze page provides objective data about the quality of various hard drives. And so in 2021, if you look at their Q1 report, they'll say, hey, if you're in the market for 14 gig or terabyte hard drives, there are 3 brands we bought a lot of. Brand A fails 0.8% of the time. So it does not last 5 years, 0.8% of the time. And you can buy brand A on Amazon right now with Prime shipping for $509. Brand B fails 0.46% of the time. So considerably less failures than brand A. And you can buy it on Amazon even cheaper than brand A for $477. And brand C fails by far the most, 2.33% of the time, but it's the cheapest. You can buy it on Amazon for $419. So faced with this information from Google, what products do most consumers choose? They choose brand B, right? Because it's the best combination of reliability and cost. Almost no one looking at this data is going to choose brand A. And I would argue in certain circumstances, maybe you have a very short-term use for the hard drive. Maybe you're buying the hard drive for a project for someone you don't particularly like. You might cheap out and buy the least expensive hard drive, even though it has a slightly higher failure rate. But whichever hard drive you chose it because of objective information that was easily available to you instead of some association with the brand. And that is the definition of absolute value. So absolute value is a concept that was developed by a professor at Stanford, Itmar Simonson. He wrote an academic paper that you can download from Stanford about absolute value. But he also published a consumer book that you can get on Amazon called Absolute Value. And the basic premise of the book is that when quality is hard to predict, consumers tend to use brand as a shortcut for quality. But when it's easy for consumers to assess the true quality of things, loyalty to a brand is much lower. And as a result of digital disruption of shopping, in many product categories, it's much easier than ever before to get objective information about the quality of a product. So let's think about a couple of examples. Let's think about sunscreen. If you're standing in the aisle at Walgreens and you're staring at 2 boxes, you don't even get to see the tube in that box, much less the indistinct white gel that's inside that tube. And of course, there's no way for you to judge which one of those white gels is going to protect you from the sun more, or even more importantly, protect your baby from the sun, right? So how do we all choose sunscreen? Well, we've been exposed to great and clever marketing to build brand awareness for sunscreens for more than 50 years. And so, Coppertone has had a long history of spending a lot of money on building brand, and they tended to be the first choice of consumers when they're standing in that aisle because they had the best brand awareness. But again, in the digital era, recognizing that Coppertone logo isn't necessarily how consumers pick sunscreen anymore. Do you know how consumers pick sunscreen today? Again, they go to Google, and Google sends them to a web page that's run by a set of not-for-profit scientists called the Environmental Working Group. And the Environmental Working Group evaluate the efficacy and safety of a variety of consumer products, but they became best known for this annual report they did on sunscreens. And about 10 years ago, when they first published this report, it made a big splash because it had some inconvenient truths in it. Most sunscreens weren't very good at blocking the sun or protecting us from skin cancer. And by the way, a lot of sunscreens have toxic ingredients in them that are bad for you, even if you don't go out in the sun. And so the Environmental Working Group bought all of these sunscreens, they tested them in a laboratory, and they published a list of how effective each sunscreen was and how toxic each sunscreen was. So for the last several years, one of the top-rated sunscreens in the Environmental Working Group list is from a company called Think Baby. And so this gets a 1 on the 5-point Environmental Working Group scale, 1 being the best. It both is very effective at blocking the sun and preventing skin cancer, and it also doesn't have very many dangerous or toxic ingredients in it. So when we flip over to Amazon and say, hey, what's the best-selling sunscreen for babies? Again, it's not Coppertone, it's Think Baby. Think Baby is the Amazon choice on Amazon for their consistent performance and bestseller status and highest conversion rate. The best-selling sunscreen on Amazon is Think Baby. And you probably have never seen a Think Baby TV commercial because they've never run a TV commercial. They're a relatively small company, I want to say out of Austin, Texas. And they have become one of the dominant sunscreens in the industry, not because of brand building and marketing, but because of absolute value, because of having the best product. And it became easier and easier for consumers to know that they make an excellent product. Hey, everyone. Editing Room Jason here. I didn't want to miss this opportunity to point out that this is probably the most important advice you will ever get from me. Most of my advice is just my opinions, and let's be honest, many of them are dubious at best. But the benefits of wearing an effective sunscreen are real. It's science. You should do it. Now, back to our regular show. So let's think about what other categories this plays out in. If you've ever tried to shop for a tire, it's another example of where I could literally hand you a tire and you would have no idea if it was a good one or a bad one. But luckily, when you're shopping for a tire, you have an easy tool to use to help you choose, right? The manufacturer has conveniently printed a number right on the tire. This is a 65,000 mile tire. And we go, great, 65 is better than 50, so I want the 65. Or I'm on a tight budget, I'm going to settle for the 25, let's say. But if you really think about that for a second, what are the odds that that tire is going to last you 25 or 50,000 miles? It simply can't be accurate, right? And does that product manufacturer have a vested interest in making that number super accurate? They don't. But even if they did, it's impossible that that tire is going to provide the same performance to Jeff Gordon for his number 24 car as it's going to provide for me and my 1997 Ford Pinto. If you don't know Jeff Gordon, he's known to be a very aggressive driver.
Slow down. Slow down. You can't go through that gate, Mike. Stop. Stop.
Exhibiting the normal characteristics you'd expect from somebody who's got a lot of adrenaline. They're really pumping it.
And usually
But there's no way that he and I are getting the same mileage out of a tire. So that number the manufacturer prints on that tire can't possibly be right for both of us. So who's disrupting the tire industry? Interestingly, one of the oldest and largest incumbents in the tire industry. The largest tire dealer in the United States is a company called Discount Tire.
If ever you're not satisfied with one of our tires, please feel free to bring it back. Thank you. Discount Tire Company.
And Discount Tire has continuously run this commercial for over 30 years. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest running commercial. And the message Discount Tire wanted you to take from this ad is that nothing is more important to the Discount Tire than customer satisfaction. So one component of that is that they will always take care of the tires they sell you. If you ever need those tires rotated, bring them to Discount Tire and they'll do it for free. If you need to check the inflation or you need to add air to a tire, bring it to Discount Tire. They're happy to do that for free. If you have a problem with a tire or a tire needs to be patched, again, bring it to Discount Tire. They'll do it for free. So unlike a lot of other tire dealers, they don't just see the tire when they originally put it on your car. on average, they see that tire 6 times over the life of the tire. And guess what they do? They collect all of the data from each of those visits. So where you live, what vehicle you have, how fast the tire's wearing. When you originally bought the tire, they keep track of what attributes you said were important to you about the tire. And so today they have this huge database of how tires perform in the real world in various zip codes on various vehicles. And so when I go shopping at Discount Tire, they have an attribute on the product detail that they call the treadwell data, right? So here in the lower right-hand corner of this product detail page, it is telling me that on my vehicle in my zip code, this particular tire averages 2 years and 8 months of tread life. And so for me, that's going to equate to 201 miles per dollar that I'll spend on that tire. So instead of using that fake 50,000 mile number from the manufacturer, I get to pick tires from Discount Tire based on the miles per dollar for me specifically with the way I drive my vehicle in my area. And once I've shopped for a tire that way, I'm never going to go back to the old way of shopping for a tire again. I'm never going to go to a dealer that doesn't have this data available. So Discount Tire has very cleverly leveraged absolute value to their competitive advantage. Again, their competitors don't offer absolute value. They just offer marketing. And Discount Tire has created absolute value to help you pick a tire. Do you know who else doesn't have this data about the tire? The tire manufacturer, right? Like they don't even know what customer bought the tire or what vehicle it got installed in, much less how it performs after the customer got it. Only the dealer with a direct relationship with the consumer can collect this data, right? And so this is happening in a wide variety of categories right now, is categories where the primary play was to invest in building a brand and win by having the best known brand, are now getting replaced by products that are winning because of absolute value. In some case, they might be winning accidentally because someone else in the industry created absolute value, like the sunscreen example. In some cases, they're getting disrupted by a player in the industry themselves, like in the Discount Tire example. Brand is still valuable, and I would certainly encourage people to still invest in a brand. But if we go back to the David Aakar model, however much money we're spending to build our brand, we're getting a slightly lower return on that investment than we used to get because consumers are increasingly not going to use that brand as a shortcut for quality. So we'll still get the other brand attributes, but my dollars are working less hard on building brand than they ever did. And the dollars I invest in improving my product quality are working harder than they ever have before. And so it's imperative that you think about the possibilities of your category getting disrupted by absolute value and how you'll respond to that disruption. And even better, think about what unique data you could collect to be the disruptor in your category. If you go back to last week's video when we talked about social proof, I mentioned that a lot of grocery stores are rolling out digital fact tags that have ratings and reviews on them. So this is another example. Pringles competed successfully in the marketplace for years by building a great brand with a unique product package and creating great associations with their brand. But increasingly, customers in the aisle of Walmart and Kroger and Amazon Fresh are going to see the real ratings and reviews for those Pringles. So increasingly, Pringles is going to have to win based on their product quality as reflected in their ratings and reviews. And so it's probably smart for Pringles to be rethinking their marketing investment because whatever was right in the old world, it's not right in a world that's been disrupted by absolute value. So I hope that gives you a taste of how powerful absolute value can be and how critical it is to be thinking about it proactively before it happens to you. You don't want to be Coppertone or a tire manufacturer in this example. You want to be the disruptor, or you at least want to be able to be a fast follower when someone else disrupts you. So I hope this video was valuable to you. If it was, please click that like button to help other people discover it, and even better, click that subscribe button so that you get the future parts of this video. As always, if you have any comments about this topic or there are other topics you're interested in hearing about, please leave me a comment down below. And until next time, Happy commercing.